The rest of the story. On capital punishment in modern times, you're either for or against. 200 years ago, if you'd committed a serious crime and were sentenced to death, how you died depended on who you were. And that was about the time the good Dr. Joseph came out of nowhere and changed things for the better. What this 18th century humanitarian got for his trouble, that is the rest of the story. Dr. Joseph was a humanitarian to some. He was a bleeding heart to others. Deep down, I suspect that he was flat out against capital punishment, but he realized he'd get nowhere with that conviction. After all, we're talking about the 1700s. So Dr. Joseph contented himself with a personal crusade against the accepted methods of execution. They were all unnecessarily cruel, he maintained. They were all in some way linked to torture. But Dr. Joseph was just one doctor, just one voice. So, in 1789, he managed to get himself elected to the Constituent Assembly. There, at least, he would have something to say about the laws concerning capital punishment. Dr. Joseph began to research the history of execution. He delved into the ancient forgotten books which described capital punishment through the ages, looking for an answer. He perused the laws of other countries, their customs of dealing with crime. Somewhere, there had to be a solution. At last, Dr. Joseph discovered it. And excited over what he had found, the good doctor hurried to the next assembly meeting, a folder bulging with the data he had studied. It appeared that the Italians had already come up with the ideal means of doing away with a prisoner. They called it mannaia. It was an optional execution for those of noble birth. You might say an execution fit for a king. Well, once again, the assemblymen shook their heads. But this time there was no laughter, for what Dr. Joseph had described to them was in fact among the very few absolutely effective, positively painless means of bringing death. So the official word was released. The ancient form of execution, mannaia, was under scrutiny by the Constituent Assembly. Tests were performed on cadavers, analyses were made, and the results were satisfactory. So a vote was taken. On April 25, 1792, 3 hard-fought years after Dr. Joseph's campaign had begun, mannaia, for the first time, was put to use. Dr. Joseph had won almost. No, Dr. Joseph was never to become a victim of his humane contraption. Remember, he was a gentleman, much respected, well-loved. In fact, when Dr. Joseph's countrymen saw the sense of humane execution, when they realized it was a step forward toward a more civil civilization, they honored the good doctor by naming it after him. And that is how Dr. Joseph lost. For the crude instrument he helped to refine, the machine from an Italian archive rose from the pages of history to inspire terror forever after. Or as a means of death, this nobleman's form of execution is still perhaps the most humane. The problem was it did not appear to be. And yet the mannaia got a new lease on death and another name from the man who single-handedly had resurrected it. And the gentle doctor's children in time changed their own names to avoid being associated with his, Dr. Joseph Guillotine. And now you know the rest of the story.